All right. Okay, so welcome everybody. We're all back together for the third community expert meeting for CARB's community engagement model.
Hola, bienvenidos a todos. Ya estamos de regreso en nuestra tercera sesión de este modelo de participación comunitario con la reunión de expertos.
A quick reminder that today's meeting will be recorded.
Y también un recordatorio breve de que esta reunión se estará grabando.
Before we get started, I also want to introduce to all of you the presenters for tonight's meeting representing CARB.
Y antes de que comencemos, me encantaría presentarles a todos los oradores, a los ponentes que conforman a CAR por sus siglas en inglés.
This evening, you're going to be hearing from Lashe Cobley, Amanda Anderson, and Jonathan Bluffer.
Esta tarde escucharán de Amanda Anderson, Jonathan Buffer y Noemi Vitelli.
And Lashe Cobley.
Y Lashe Cobley. Thank you.
Thanks, Aldo. And they are all members of the Community Engagement and Capacity Building Work Group.
Y todos ellos son parte del modelo participación comunitario de creación.
All right, so we're going to go a little bit more quickly than usual through our language interpretation instructions, since we've done this a few times before.
Y dado que ya hemos repasado cómo son las indicaciones de interpretación, lo vamos a hacer un poquito más rápido.
So you'll notice in your meeting and webinar controls that once the interpretation function is started, you'll see a globe at the bottom, located at the bottom of the screen.
Y una vez que ustedes vean en la parte inferior de su pantalla un icono en forma de un mundo, ustedes verán que ese será el que se utiliza para la interpretación.
So you're going to go ahead and click on the interpretation globe, and whether you're choosing the Spanish channel or the English channel, you'll need to select either one. So if you're listening in English, please select English, and if you're listening in Spanish, please select Spanish.
Y ya sea que usted vaya a utilizar el idioma de su preferencia, sea español, sea inglés, favor de presionar uno de ellos y cuando lo presione aparecerá inglés o español.
Great, so we can go ahead and launch the interpretation function.
Muy bien, así que ahora podemos arrancar comenzando la función de interpretación. Thank you, Julia.
Great, thank you, Aldo. All right, so I'm in the English channel. We'll go ahead and get started. A quick reminder as well, if you'd like to view the slides in Spanish, you can click a green bar at the top of the screen, and you should see something on the right that says View Options. You can click on that, and you'll see two shared screens, and you can select the presentation in Spanish. All right, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, also just a reminder to please mute yourself unless you're speaking or asking a question, and to rename yourself with your name and preferred pronouns. And if you need any help, please use the chat to request assistance. Next slide, please. All right, so this is our agenda for this evening with about 10 minutes for welcome. And then we're going to be reviewing the expert recommendations thus far for about 45 minutes. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and review the community dialogue session recommendations for about 25 minutes. And then we have some questions for you all, our community experts. So we'll do that for about 40 minutes. Just want to emphasize here that we asked in advance for some feedback on the agenda for this evening, whether folks wanted to do breakout rooms or a larger group discussion. And the responses that we received indicated that a large group discussion was preferred. So we'll be doing that this evening. And thanks for your feedback. After that, we'll have another break, and then we'll continue with contract updates and next steps. And then we'll finish with a survey and closing remarks. All right, next slide, please. So just reviewing again our meeting core principles, participate fully. We definitely want to hear from you. Stay focused on the agenda, keep equity central. And just a reminder that a component of equity is that goal to make space and take space. So please feel free to offer comments however feels best for you, whether that's verbally or in the chat or via Jamboard. I will help keep us on time and move things along as the agenda requires. To do this, I might interrupt you from time to time. I don't mean any disrespect, but that'll just be to give us a time reminder and keep us on track. Additionally, we can always stay online for about 20 to 30 minutes after the meeting if anybody has more questions. And our other core principles here assume good intent and all ideas and points of view have value. Next slide. All right, so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Lashay, and she's going to take us into our next section, which is feedback on the model.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm hoping to keep this energy over the next 45 minutes. So I just want to, before I jump into this, say out loud that I talk fast. And I know for interpretive reasons, I need to slow down, and I will try to. The easiest way to slow me down is to ask me questions. I really don't want to lecture at you guys for the next 45 minutes. I want it to be a discussion. Feel free to ask questions. I do not see it as a bad thing. I do not see it as sort of interrupting me. I welcome it. There's a couple of points during my part of the presentation where we will have discussion items. So what I hope you guys get from the next 45 minutes is a couple of things. First things first, you'll have an idea of how we solicited the comments, and that'll just be a reminder. That's information that you guys know already. But you'll really get a sense of the magnitude of comments that we've received. I'll also go over our approach for addressing those comments and give you a small dose of like, hey, here's what we've been hearing. It's very preliminary. It's just a couple of topics, but we really want to give you guys a taste and a flavor of like, hey, here's what we've been hearing so far. And then last, you'll hear more about where we are in the process in terms of how many comments we've gone through, how many we still need to go through, and what our next steps are. Cool. Any questions there so far? You know where we're going. Okay, so let's start with the comments that where we got our comments from. So first, obviously, we got them from you all, our community experts. You guys gave line item edits, so you've gone through the model and line by line, you were like, hey, think about this, think about this. We also specifically asked you guys about 60 questions in the model, and we have your responses to those questions. And you've given us general feedback in forms of these meetings, the 2 meetings that we've had before, and some of you have even written us responses that we also have. In addition to you all, we've had our community dialogue sessions. There's been 8 sessions. Amanda will cover that in detail later in the presentation. But just to say, out of those 8 meetings, we mostly got general comments on the model. So those are not your line by line edits. This is just like, hey, here's what we think about community engagement. We also have a public docket that is open now, and folks can write into us. In general, those have just been general commentary on community engagement. They haven't been line by line edits on the model. And then we also have one-on-one calls and email conversations that we've had with community members, and also, sorry, let me mute. Are you guys hearing that pinging?
Not hearing anything.
Okay, good. Didn't know if it was distracting. Okay, yeah, so we've had these one-on-one calls with individuals who have reached out to us to say, hey, we have feedback on the model. Those have been calls with mostly community groups. And they're mostly giving us general feedback, not line by line edits. And then the last way that we've solicited comments is more internal facing. So there are a number of folks at CARB who do community engagement work more regularly than some of the folks who are in CEBC, in our CECB work group. So for reference, the community engagement capacity building work group who you guys have been interacting with, we are spread throughout the different divisions on the agency, and we've provided that broad feedback. But we're also going to groups throughout the agency who have more interactions with community members, and we're getting their feedback as well to make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. So those are all the ways we've gotten our feedback. Now I'm going to go into how much feedback we received. Next slide, slide 7. So we've received over 2,000 individual comment lines, which we are extremely grateful for. You all have put a lot of time and energy into giving us feedback on the model, and we want to honor that, and we want to take time to address the comments that we received. So there's the detailed comments that we got from you all. We've only received 5 comments from the public document from the public docket now, but it's still open. So hopefully more will come in. And of our attendees at the dialogue sessions, the community dialogue sessions, there are about 200 attendees. So all of those led to those 2,000 comments. When we initially started planning for how long we thought this would take, we did not anticipate that we would get that level of detail in terms of comments. And that's why we're asking for the no cost extension in your contracts, because we want to put the time and energy into discussing your comments and actively incorporating them into the model. Pausing to see if there are any questions. Cool, we can go to the next slide. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to respond to the comments and how we have been responding to the comments. I think it's important to first share our principle of like, hey, here's our goal, here's what's guiding us. The first is transparency, and I think the most important is transparency. So we will obviously share all of the comments that we received, and we'll say out loud in public, here's if it was incorporated into the model, if it wasn't incorporated into the model, and what we did with it. But we think that part of that transparency is not just putting a spreadsheet online that has those 2,000 comments, because a lot of things can get lost in that. And so we want to make sure that we are synthesizing those comments and helping to digest them so that it makes sense to you all, our community experts, and also to community members in general of how we've responded to their comments. So there's a number of ways that we're doing that. One is that we're tracking them all on the spreadsheet, and so that will be made live. But also that synthesis and that storytelling will come in the form of summaries. So there'll be a public meeting where we highlight the feedback that we've gotten and how they were incorporated, but we'll also have a written document of, hey, here's a summary of the comments that we received and the outcomes. Cool, next slide. Slide 9. So what happens with the comment? When we get those individual comments, one of 3 things can happen. The first is pretty straightforward. It can get incorporated into the model. The second, and I will say of all of these 3, I'll have examples on the next slide of what falls into these categories. But that second category is comments that are incorporated into the model, that are not incorporated into the model, but made as a recommendation to upper management, to our executive office. So there are a couple of things that can fall into this category. One, it could be something that requires a level of effort and time that we don't have for the rest of this process. So if we think that it'll take more than a year to really and truly address that comment, then it's going to be made into a recommendation to EO. If it's outside of the scope of what the model is trying to do, remembering that the model is built for staff members, then that might get put as a recommendation to upper management. And lastly, if it requires the authority of people who are outside of this work group, right? So if the comment leads to, needing our executive officer or our board or the legislature to weigh in, then those are going to be things that are made into that recommendation list. We want to make sure that things just don't go onto the list and then nothing happens to it. So part of our accountability on what happens to that list of recommendations is twofold. One is that we're going to post that list publicly, so you all can hold us accountable of like, hey, this is on the list, we didn't hear from this. And then the second thing that we're going to do is that we're going to provide a status update at our 4th community expert meeting with you all, where we're like, hey, here's what's happening with these lists of items. Okay. So that's our second category. The last category of things that can be done to a comment is that it's not incorporated into the model at all. And we give you a reason for why that's not incorporated. So remembering 3 things can happen to a comment. It gets incorporated, it's not incorporated, and it's made into a recommendation, or it's not incorporated and you know why. Yeah, Richard.
Thank you for this information so far without slowing us down. Number 1, who is going to be making the decisions as far as from those 2,000 comments, how they get synthesized and get selected into one of these three areas?
We do it collectively as a work group. So there's 15 of us in the work group, and we all have our different tasks for how we're going through them. Our goal, and I'll get more into this on the next slide, our goal in all of the comments is to figure out a way to incorporate it. We appreciate your expertise. That's why we're contracting with you all, and we want to take that seriously. So the goal is always at the very heart to figure out how we can incorporate things in. Does that help answer the question? I don't want to talk around it. Yeah. Yeah, Jasmine.
Hi, I'm just letting you know I just got in. I was having some problems with my Zoom. I couldn't log in for some reason. So hi, I'm sorry. I'm a little late, but the Zoom wasn't cooperating with me.
No worries. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Can you see my camera okay? Because I don't have like the view of like, you know, everybody in the panel. I don't know how to do that. It's not letting me do that. Okay. Well, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Right. Okay, let's go to slide 10, where I'll give some examples. So the first is, here's an example of something that was incorporated. A lot of the time we heard, hey, you're using acronyms we don't know, or you're using terminology that can have multiple meanings. Be very consistent about how you're defining your terms. That seems very fair to us. We're creating a glossary in the model, but then we'll also have some language in the model that highlights to staff to remind them of like, be really mindful with the vocabulary that you use, always define your terms, just those reminders. So it's a pretty straightforward example of a comment that we got and how we're incorporating it. Next. So let's go over recommendations. So again, recommendations are things that are a little outside the scope or maybe outside of the time frame that we have allotted. So one of the comments that we received is wanting our staff to develop biographies at the regional level, right? So working with communities at the regional level and having some background on who they are, what's happening there, right? Like we talked about the fog in the Central Valley, right? Folks at CARB should know that. In order to do that extensive level for all of California, we think that that takes time. And so that's something that's going to be made as a recommendation to our executive office. Next. So I'll give this example and then I'll qualify it. So here's an example of a comment that was not incorporated. We had agency-wide with a hyphen and someone said, hey, get rid of the hyphen. We decided to not incorporate that comment because according to the guidelines with the NIH, agency-wide has a hyphen in it. I know that this comment is really, or this example is really basic, right? You're like, okay, Lasha, you're only not taking grammar. No, but I do that for several reasons. One, it should be at this level, right? Again, to Richard's point in question earlier, our goal is to try and incorporate as much of your comments as possible. With that said, at this point in where we are, most of the no's have been at this level. If things come out that are more extensive than this, you'll know about it. You'll hear about it in our next community expert meeting. And you'll also hear about it in terms of like, it will be in the summary of notes, right? We won't hide our no's. We'll give context for why is really a principle that we're trying to uphold. Okay, next slide. So now I want to talk about, maybe not controversial is the right word, but I want to talk about what happens when we hear conflicting comments on a subject. So the number one, thank you, yeah, we're on slide 11. So the number one goal here for when we hear conflicting things, our guiding principle is to just be really transparent about the choices that we make. We as a community and we as a work group will have to make choices, and we're going to say out loud that those choices were made. So an example of conflicting comments that we heard was around the term stakeholder. So we asked you all as a question of how do you guys feel about us using the term community stakeholder versus stakeholder? We kind of have mixed responses. A lot of folks were neutral. Some folks were like, yeah, that's fine by me. And a small subset of folks did ask us to change that. In the end, we decided to not use the word stakeholder for a couple of reasons. One being that we found out that the word stakeholder can be rooted in colonialism with the idea of staking claim to something. We're going to provide alternatives in the model, most of which is affected parties. And the reason we decided to use affected parties is to constantly be reminding staff that the work that we do at CARB impacts people and are affecting their lives. And we'll also just use the term communities, community member, and things like that. We will also have a blurb in the model that says why we're not using the word stakeholder. I think oftentimes you can make a decision, but folks don't know why you're making it. So we'll make it clear that that is something that we're doing. Okay, next slide. So this is the ugly slide. I know there's a lot going on here. I'll walk you through it. So in our last community expert meeting, we had a discussion on things that must be in the model. And that sort of fell into about 16 categories of things that you guys wanted to make sure were there. Those 16 categories are what you see in yellow. We've since then grouped those categories as part of that synthesis of like, how are these things related together? What connections can we be making? And so those white boxes along the top are those categories. Today, I'm going to go over responses to 3 of them. So I'll go over equitable listening, abuse and harassment, training and participation. At our next community meeting, we're going to go over a lot of things. For example, the recommendations to EO. We'll talk about other emerging topics that have come out of all the comments that we've heard. But I want to know, of these topics here, in the limited time that we'll have during that meeting, are there things where you're like, hey, Lashe, for sure we want to know out loud during our time together how you guys are thinking about community empowerment? Of these topics that are here, are there anything that you want to make sure is in the presentation for community expert meeting 4, so that they don't fall through the cracks, so to speak? And I'll open it up to hear from you guys of what needs to be there, or what you want to hear out loud. You'll get answers for it all, but just what you want to make sure we spend time on in the meeting.
I don't see any comments yet in the chat, but let's give folks a few minutes or a few seconds to look this over. And please do raise your hand or put in the chat if you want to communicate which of those key points you want to hear about in community meeting number 4.
I would like to chime in on the undocumented resident inclusion with the refugee populations, and of course those with visa challenges, helping them to make sure that they are not only invited to the table, but helping them to feel like they belong at the table safely as well, and to not face any kind of retribution when it comes to anything related to their documentation.
Heard.
Yep, and Lashe, just want to note that we have a lot of agreement in the chat to Richard's comment. Elena also put undocumented resident inclusion as well. We've got 4 thumbs up on that topic, so a lot of support there. I'll also have a comment in the chat here from Emily: equitable listening and community self-determination. Is there anything else you want to add to that selection, Emily?
No, nothing I want to add. I'd just like to, hear those expanded upon.
Okay, great. And then Catalina has in the chat transportation access consideration. Catalina, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Any additional context?
Hi, nothing to add. Just, would like to see that point presented.
Great. And Leonora, I see your comment in the chat. So if you go to view options at the top of the screen, you should have 2 shared screens to choose from: the English presentation slides and the Spanish presentation slide. Let me know if you're able to switch over to the English.
Thanks
Awesome.
so much.
No problem. Hey, any other comments? Caro is interested to see more about conflict resolution as well. Anything else you'd like to add?
Nothing else to add.
Okay. And then-
Excuse me, this is Lisa. I can't find my hand raise thing.
That's all right, go ahead.
Because my eyes are like dilated today, so I'm working at a disadvantage. The diversity, equity, and inclusion, there also needs to be a greater effort to tie in tribal folks, both the rural and the urban tribal folks in this model as well. And not at the minimum of you just reach out to them, so.
You'll hear more on that. Thank you for bringing
Okay.
that out loud. You'll hear more on that today.
All right, thank you.
And also for the transportation, we'll also talk a little bit about that today. And the folks who said harassment, that's also in our touch point for today as well.
Great, thanks, Lisa. We have a question from Jasmine in the chat. Why should we include undocumented people? And a response from Sierra, because they're members of our community. So Jasmine, if you'd like to add additional context to that, welcome you to come off mute. Okay. And see some other responses to that in the chat from our other community.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute myself.
experts. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, can you
Go
hear
ahead.
me? I just want to know what your response would be for that, for the fact that, you know, just wanted to know. I'm curious to know why that they were they were included as, you know, in this whole thing, because since they're undocumented, they're not accounted for, therefore we don't know that much about them. So I was just asking. I just wanted to know where the stance was on that.
Sure. I don't know if any of our card folks.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, usually they're not gonna come out and be like, I'm undocumented, you know, because they wouldn't do that. So I'm, you know, curious to know, how would you even know it was undocumented?
I think
That's
the
it.
point of making it a safe space for those folks to come out is helpful, right? So if we ensure that there's not police presence, right? If we ensure that, for example, folks don't have to write their social security number if it's not needed. Yeah, Rich, I'll let you speak more to it.
Yeah,
So
and just
police, because of police presence, I think it's necessary to have police presence. But I mean, so they would feel safe if there's no police. Is that what you're saying?
That's a
shall I
little. Go
proceed?
ahead, Richard. Yeah.
Sure. Jasmine, thank you for your input on that. I can tell you, as an organizer with United Latinos, there's a number of folks who we reach out to who are visa challenged in one way or another. And we have been finding, when we put intentionality in including them into some of the community discussions, whether they are around air quality, whether they are around water quality, housing rights and things like this, it is amazing how many of them do actually chime in because they have concerns, and they're very, very grateful because they feel like they have been invisible and that they don't belong. So I can tell you, we at United Latinos do as much as we can going to where the people are, whether they are at their places of worship, at their grocery stores, at their children's schools, at their whatever, but in a very, very safe manner, because many are concerned about the fact, will it affect any papers that are under process for immigration or citizenship or anything like this. So we work very, very hard to be able to hear their voices and make sure that we are documenting their voices without necessarily demonstrating directly who they are or to agencies that may impact their citizenships. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Richard and Jasmine. Just for our Spanish-speaking channel, I want to make sure to vocalize the other response to Jasmine's question in the chat from Elena, who says that they believe it's important because undocumented folks live in many communities and most shy away from participating in their local government due to fears. All right. And we also have a comment in the chat from Leonora that she would like to hear more about childcare assistance and compensation for people's time participating.
That's also on our agenda for today. You'll see it in the next couple slides.
Great, thanks, Lachey. Any other questions, comments from our community experts?
Cool.
Okay.
Let's head to slide 13. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Gustavo.
Yeah, how's it going, everyone? Sorry, I'm mobile right now, I'm driving, but one thing I would like to add to the previous slide is like this concept of like follow-up. And so I think making sure that, residents are not only like part of this, but also get follow-up, whether it's an email or through some kind of social media communication. But I think follow-up is always crucial and very important.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so before I delve into the contents of this slide, I want to orient us to the formatting of this slide. So the next two slides will be specifically about us responding to some of the categories that you saw in yellow, right? So things that you told us in the last meeting must be in the model. Those are the categories that are here. To the left, you see a box with text that is highlighting the grouping, right? So there'll always be categories on that left-hand box, right? And that's just really telling us, cluing folks into like, hey, here's what we're talking about. In the arrow, that is a summary of comments that we've gotten relating to that comment, right? So it won't be necessarily verbatim what we heard from one community expert or from community members. It'll be a summary of like, hey, here's what we heard in general about this topic. And then that last box all the way to the right is CARB's response. Sometimes in there you'll see just a high level, here's what we're gonna do with it, or like, here's where in the model we made this change, things like that. So that's the orientation, and we hope that it encapsulates, here's what we heard, here's what we're doing about it. That's the goal of these slides, or the goal of how we want to present this. And the plan is to move forward that way. So in our next community expert meeting, and also in our meeting with the public towards the end of this process, is to sort of lay it out like this: topic, comment, here's how we responded to it. Cool. So one of the comments you guys said must be into the model is equitable listening, right? And here, it's really just highlighting that you want to make sure that CARB's community engagement is as inclusive and culturally appropriate as it can be. And the way to do that is to listen equitably to folks who've been the most disenfranchised. We're addressing this in a couple of ways in the model, and just in general at CARB. The first is through training, right? And so with the community engagement model, we will have a training associated with it that has to be developed. And so the training will go through how to listen equitably, right? And giving examples and having folks practice how to do that. We also emphasize within the model that folks should respect cultural differences. Oh, sorry, let me take a step back. So in addition to the training that the model exists, CARB internally already has several trainings that folks participate in on things like advancing racial equity, implicit bias training, learning at the speed of trust, communicating effectively, with the hope that all of these different things connected together will help staff learn how to and be better at listening more equitably. We're also going to emphasize in the model of itself that staff should be respecting cultural differences and that they should prioritize active listening. And that idea of active listening should not be a new concept for folks at CARB. It's a thing that they've heard, but we will always define it in the model. Okay, let's get to the next one. So another comment that you guys said must be in the model is that we have to address abuse and harassment. And it seems like most of the comments were just trying to make sure that we ensured that spaces that CARB are presenting at are safe and respectful for everyone there in order to do meaningful engagement. So there's a number of ways that we're going to address this. And I will say that this list that I'm about to go through is not extensive. We're still thinking about it, and it's still part of our discussion. But just at a high level, here are some of the things. One is establishing and honoring meeting agreements. With this, we want to be sure that folks do not feel like their behavior is being policed. And so we want to ensure that these meeting agreements are co-created with communities, right? We don't want to just go in and say, hey, here's how we think we should behave in this meeting. That's not the goal. It is about co-creation. I remember in one of our previous community expert meetings, folks gave the example of a 90-year-old woman who'd like raised everyone in that community being like, hey, don't tell me how to behave. We heard that loud and clear. We want to honor that and make sure that we develop all agreements, co-develop all meeting agreements. And then the last is we will highlight in the model how to practice nonviolent communication. So more on that. That's in general some of the high level things that we are thinking about to address the comments that we heard on abuse and harassment. Okay, next slide. So we heard a lot that we want to make sure that folks at CARB are trained on how to deal with sort of intense, uncomfortable opposition, right? So what happens when you're at a meeting and it's a little bit volatile? There's a couple of things that we're doing. Yeah, I'll finish this thought, Anita, and then I'll call on you. And so one is that there will be role playing in our training so that staff are put in a situation where it is a volatile or where it is a hostile conversation and they're actively having to de-escalate. Also, in both the plan and the implement templates, we're going to have and do have some language on how to de-escalate those situations. Yeah, Anita. I hope I'm pronouncing it.
Thank you. I had a question about a slide back, but it was taking me a while to figure out how to raise my hand on this thing. So my question is related to this one about respecting cultural differences. And there was a couple of slides back. I don't think you were just passing through a topic and you said, you were given an example of something and you said the response to one of the suggestions made was to, I guess, develop a profile of the area so that you know who you're talking to, what the specific needs are for that area. And I think the response was that would be sort of too much to do. Going into, would be too much of an effort, and that would be going up to the executive level. My basic thought there is, so if you basically go into a community, quote, so to speak, blind, it's going to be very difficult to recognize cultural differences, know what type of communication people prepare for, and even that, things change. So it can't be a one and done thing. So a community profile or needs or issues this year might be very different from their issues 3 years hence, like if they've just been through a wildfire or a different thing. So I don't really think there is, I might be raising this question at the wrong time. Maybe this is not the point of discussion for that issue. But I just don't think that there is any way around understanding who you're talking to. I think you have to scale it to the time available, and you can't write a hard book and put it on a shelf because communities and issues change. So, that's just my thought, that there has to be something in the model that addresses, you can't get to this point of respect and cultural differences if you go in and not even know who's there or how they communicate or what their issues are. You have to have some kind of background, and that rolls into the whole training program. That's just my thought. Thank you.
want to say fundamentally agree with you. Good point, well made. Part of the reason why it's being raised to the executive office is that we want to ensure that there's consistency. And part of what I didn't talk about is like, we believe that there needs to be a tracking software, right? If there's 2,000 people at CARB having 2,000 conversations with the 4 million, folks, no, 40 million, sorry, it's an order of magnitude off, 40 million folks of community members in California, right? We need a way of ensuring that we are capturing those conversations. And to your point of those conversations about community members consistently being things that are living and breathing and changing, right? We need to make sure that it is being captured well. And so that proposal are things that we are thinking about pretty deeply. And that's why we say it's outside of the timing. However, in the model, we will highlight like, hey, who at CARB, like you should be talking to other folks at CARB to make sure that if we've gotten to a community already, that those lessons have been learned, right? There will be points in the model to make sure that we are still doing our due diligence of getting to know communities and remembering our interactions with communities, but it's just much bigger than something that's going to happen this year. Does that, or by the end of this year, does that help? So like, we'll keep moving with what we know, but we also recognize that it's not a small task.
I would encourage CARB to kind of think of ways to make that task manageable. Their community organizations and so on, you don't have to start at ground zero every time. You don't have to start with a blank canvas, so to speak. There are community organizations who, you can reach out to. So instead of thinking in a hard, in a sort of a fixed manner, it has to be, this sort of regimented thing to have a more flexible approach, because I do understand that it's a significant effort, but it's never, I like the concept of having a database that you can add to and so on. But you got to start somewhere, and it's not at the top. So, start. So but thank you. I think you're on track, and it's not as bad as I thought. It's not as like a do nothing. We have to have this big mega thing before we can do anything. Right. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Anita. And we also have a hand up from Amanda with CARB and Leonora. Just a quick time reminder. We're scheduled to go on break in about like 7 minutes. We have a few more slides to get through. Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, really quickly, I did want to bring out one of the points that you made, Anita, and I think we can make a better effort to incorporate it into the model that communities are experiencing new things continuously, right? And so when we encourage folks to do their research before going into a community, that they look at local events and they pay attention to what might be affecting folks locally. So I think we can definitely make a note to be more explicit about that in the model, just adding to what you all have been saying, but really appreciated that point. Thank you.
Great, and Leonora, I see your hand up. Sorry, I was just taking notes there.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but I just want to express my appreciation for all these points. Like, I think this is really tough stuff, and it's like I could see there was like some tension here with some of the goals, and I think you all did a good job thinking through this. And yeah, I think it's like it's obviously not easy to do these things, like create these safe spaces, but I think this is like a really strong step in the right direction from like what's typically done.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to slide 15. So we were just talking about things that you guys told us must be in the model. Now we're going to shift to some of the comments that have sort of been emerging. This is by no means exhaustive, but it's things that we've heard from you guys repeatedly and things that have also come up in the dialogue sessions. I say that to say they even came up in this meeting today, right? The first being tribal engagement, and folks really wanting us to add more to our community engagement model about tribal engagement. Here's what we're thinking, and here's what we've been working on. CARB is already working on a separate tribal engagement guidance and training. And that is will need to go through its own ground truthing process, will need to go through its own process to happen. Our model will come out before that training and guidance document, but we want to make sure that we honor that existing and that folks are doing that work to make it good. Currently in the model, we're gonna have some history about tribal engagement, and we're gonna highlight things at a high level of like, hey, remember that when you're working with tribes, you're working with sovereign nations. Here, there are some tribes that are recognized, tribes that are not recognized, right? We'll give some of that basic things, but overall, our goal is to do no harm. We don't want to give just enough information for folks to say, oh, the community engagement model teaches me how to do tribal engagement, when it doesn't. And we're going to be very clear that it does not do that well, and that folks should be looking to the actual training and guidance document that is to come later.
Lashay, we have a question in the chat from Elena. Will the tribal model have folks from the tribes as representatives?
It has to, or it wouldn't be done well.
Great, thanks. And just want to note that there is some back and forth still going on in the chat regarding the kind of safety issue and police involvement in meetings. I don't want to take up too much time like verbally restating those messages. So we'll work on getting those translated and sent out to our Spanish-speaking participant after the meeting, just so that they don't miss out on that conversation. Just wanted to make note of that. Thanks, Lashay. I'll hand it back over to you.
No worries, thank you for that. Okay, next, let's get into the next topic. So compensation, again, another one that has come up a lot and has come up today, right? And compensation is one, paying folks for their expertise, but there's also other types of compensation that has come up, right? Making sure that there's food and childcare at our meetings. And also another one that came up was also care for elders, right? A lot of times folks who come to our meetings may be taking care of grandparents, great-grandparents, and wanting to make sure that there are activities there for them. Just wanting to say out loud, which may not be satisfactory, and I know that this is not satisfactory, is that we've heard you loud and clear. We've already made it clear to upper management that this is a thing that is consistently coming up. And we will make sure that it is also on our list of recommendations for our executive office. They're working on it. I know that that's not satisfactory, but that's where we are. Okay, next slide, so slide 16. So the last emerging topic that I will go over, is this my last one? No, just kidding, I have two more. So the next one is about access, and it is broad, right? It's really talking about like all of the forms of access, making sure that our things are translated, making sure that the content of what we're saying is accessible, making sure that our visuals are acceptable, making sure that we're explaining these things, right? Just making sure that any information that CARB has to disseminate is something that's going to be understood by every Californian. The way that we're dealing with it in the model is sort of twofold. One is pointing folks to federal plain language standards, right? There's also a plain language training at CARB and encouraging folks to take that training, and also just having some like basic principles in the community engagement model to remind folks of like, hey, don't have busy, ugly slides with a lot of text if you don't walk people through it. Hey, graphics can be really helpful, right? And like having some of those like things that we should all know so that folks can be communicating more effectively. So that's how we're dealing with access. Next is capacity. So we heard about capacity a lot of different ways. One of which is, hey, you should employ people from the communities you're trying to do outreach to, right? Have CARB look like California. We've also heard for the staff that you currently have and staff that you will have, make sure that they have dedicated time and resources to actively work on community engagement, that it's not just one of many tasks that they're working on. And also take the time and energy and resources that is needed to have consistent relationship with communities. That's sort of what we heard about this topic. Obviously, this is a thing that we are elevating to our executive office. They are aware and have been made aware of. These are the things that we are hearing from this model. wait, I lost myself. Yeah. And so I wanted to highlight that one of the tasks that we've been giving as a work group from our executive office when we spoke about this topic is for us to develop a proposal where we say out loud, hey, here are the capacity needs. Here's how many positions we need. Here's how much time we need. Here's how much resources we need to do community engagement effectively at CARB for all of our programs and regulations. So just to say, it's been elevated and it's also been given us as a task of like coming up with a proposal for what that looks like. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's just a little, hey, here's what we've heard. I think the magnitude of those comments are spot on of like, we're not getting, you know, light and fluffy, this is great, move on with your model comments, right? We're getting things that actively take thought and resources and we're moving through them. Of those 2,000 comments, we have gone through a lot, but we still have a lot more to go through. So we've sorted about 40% of them. So 40, that sorted means that it was either categorized. So again, categories are things that will be helpful with the storytelling and us synthesizing the information, right? So 40% of them have been categorized, or it's been, it can mean that it's been assigned as a task, right? So some things are going to require us to go back and, like, for example, we got a comment about redlining in Fresno and redlining in the Central Valley in general, where we had to do some research about that, right? And that's been assigned to a person or group of folks to look at that comment. Or sort of can mean that it's been fully addressed, where we've made the change in the model already. So that's what I mean by sorted versus unsorted. You can say, hey, Lashe, 40% is not the majority. You guys still have a lot of work to do. And that is true. We do still have a lot of work to do. I will say that that 40% is conservative. We have folks who are working where, for example, for the 60 questions that we asked you all, those aren't sorted per se, but we already have a team of folks who are sort of making sense of your responses to those questions. So we've gone through a lot more than 40% of the comments, if that makes sense. But we want to be conservative and say, hey, this is where we at. We need time. Okay. And then my last slide will just be about next steps. So right now we are addressing all of the comments that we've heard. The public docket closes on April 3rd, so we'll get more comments in, hopefully, and we'll be addressing them. I will say our goal is to have the revised model to you all before our 4th and last community expert meeting. I would say late summer at the earliest, right? Really be looking for that in the fall. And then we'll have our 4th community expert meeting in the fall. After that meeting, you know, you'll say, hey, we agree with these things, we don't agree with these things, or you need to work more on this. We'll incorporate what you guys have said and have, you know, the finalized, I say finalized, it'll still be a draft because it's a living document, but we'll have that more finalized model out after we hear from you all. And then we're going to go into developing trainings.
All right, thank you so much, Lashe. I also want to stop and just see if anybody has any questions. We're running a few minutes behind, but that's okay. We've got a little bit of wiggle room in the schedule. So just want to note that we have a comment from Jasmine, uplifting what you were saying, Lashe, that storytelling is key and how that process is part of putting together storytelling. And that Jasmine sent along a draft of the storytelling process. Any other questions or comments from our community experts before we go on a break? Catalina?
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation, Lashe. Really appreciated you taking the time with each point. Yeah, I was just curious about, you mentioned at the top that there was like 2,000 individual comments. Just wondering if CARB staff had a sense of like how many individuals have participated. Because I don't know if that's the same number of comments. So just like to clarify that point. And then just wondering, like, in terms of like addressing comments, I was just wondering, are any like will there be any response to comments that experts submitted? So like how do we know if our comments are being addressed, assigned? Like is there going to be direct response to comments submitted by folks here?
Yeah, great question. So for the first one, so of those 2,000, those comments came from you all, right? So your detailed comments that you gave us, those line by line edits, also things that you've said out loud in these meetings as part of it. So a bulk of it is from the 19 of you all. We've had 200 attendees at those dialogue sessions. So, I mean, maybe not all 200 spoke all the time, but collectively we've heard from those 200 folks, and that's part of that 2,000 as well. We have the 5 folks who gave us commentary on the public docket, and we also have individual meetings with community members and CBOs. I forget I would say order of magnitude, probably like in the tens of those types of conversations, which is to say, I think that it's come from a diverse group of folks, a diverse number of folks that we've gotten those comments on. And then to your second point about knowing individual comments. So the spreadsheet that we post will have individual comments. What I'm thinking now, in terms of, thank you for that, Deidre, for the number of individuals in the chat. What I'm thinking is that what we post online will be anonymous and that it will just have the comments. But then for individual folks on this, for the individual community experts, you will have all of the comments, but then you will also have the comments that you specifically gave us with responses so that it's easier for you to filter out, hey, here's the comments that we gave them. That's my approach right now, thinking for how we will deal with that in a way that's still time effective for us to get you back those comments. Does that help? And does that answer your questions?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's helpful for now. I think just still, yeah, just curious if there will be like any other, like response to our comments other than like the spreadsheet. Yeah, and then sorry, just like a final thought on that, just like, is there a way of like monitoring or are you all like tallying like repeat comments? So does 2,000 mean that you've like kind of accounted for comments that have been repeated? Because I think it's also helpful to know kind of like what was the most common comment, like what have folks said the most? Yeah, I think that would also be helpful.
Yeah, this is good for us to hear because then it will help us direct how we synthesize things to you all. So for example, with the stakeholder comment, we didn't tally it up. Like if we tallied it, then we wouldn't have changed it because most folks said that they didn't mind using the word stakeholder, right? And so instead what we went with is for the folks who said no, why they said no, and that outweighed the I'm ambivalent, right? And so I think when we synthesize, it won't just be number of comments, but like the depth of comments. So I get lost in my thoughts. But to your point of how will you guys hear it? So yes, there will be the spreadsheet. In our 4th community expert meeting, it will be kind of like today where we go over, you know, here is what we heard. It won't be preliminary. It'll be more of the like heavy hitter topics. So that's another way that you'll get feedback. And then there's also the summary that we provide. And that summary that will be online for all folks to see will have the list of recommendations to EO. It will have the topics that we heard loud and clear. It'll be topics that we heard consistently. So part of, I call it triaging, but part of triaging all of our comments is that we're categorizing them, right? And so if we hear a comment more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times, that is now a category, right? And responding to that category of like already tells us that it's a thing that we've heard more than once. Folks who are, well, everyone on the call is helping with the comments, but if I'm missing something, feel free to add to it. I think, Catalina, your questions are really helpful.
All right, so if there's no additional questions, we'll go ahead and go on break. We're running about 10 minutes over, so our new time to return, we're going to come back at 6:15. And then for our carb speakers, I'll help keep you guys on track in terms of timing. We'll stick with the original timing and take a few minutes from the contract updates. Thank you so much, Lashay, for that presentation. And when we come back, we're going to be hearing from Amanda. All right, so we'll see you all back in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hey, Richard. Welcome back. Sorry, we're both the early birds back. All right, I'm gonna wait till I see a few more faces on camera just to make sure nobody's still grabbing a tea or stretching their legs. All right, and we can go ahead and move to the next slide as well. All right, so I'm going to hand it over here to Amanda for a conversation on the community dialogue recommendations, and we're going to go until about 6:40 on this presentation. So take it away, Amanda.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you got a chance to drink some water. I did some deep breathing exercises that probably didn't work, but bear with me here. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time going over what we heard at the public dialogue sessions. Since we met with you all last time, we had 8 of those meetings. We had about 200 folks attend, as you heard from Lashay. And in the slide, you'll see a breakdown of the virtual meetings that we held as well as the in-person meetings. So you'll notice that there is a change from what we originally planned. As you know, we originally planned to host 7 in-person and 2 virtual meetings, but we did receive that budget memo early in the year, and we were advised to halt all travel and cancel our rentals. So that's where we saw that shift from in-person to virtual meetings. And we know you all had identified those locations, so we were really concerned with still reaching folks in those areas that we had not gotten to yet. So that included Raleigh, Bakersfield, Fresno, and East LA. So part of our outreach for the remaining virtual sessions included us spending additional time researching local advocates and CBOs in those specific regions and making sure that we did outreach to folks in those areas in addition to our more general outreach for the virtual sessions. So we know it's not perfect, but we were trying to find some way to mitigate those changes and that loss of in-person. We did see a lot of benefits still to both the virtual and the in-person meetings. So we were able to get a lot more participation in the virtual meetings, but we also saw that the in-person meetings we had a lot more personalized and those organic conversations. And we were able to pivot to some more informal conversation instead of like the presentation response kind of mode. So we definitely see that there is benefits to both virtual and in-person meetings. And it seems like going forward, having a nice combination of both would be ideal. Are there any questions about that or questions about the locations? All right, so we can go to the next slide then, slide 21.
Hi, sorry.
Yeah, please.
I really did enjoy our in-person meeting. It also felt like we had a chance to actually talk and meet with the CARB representatives and put a face to the organization. So yes, we can do that, of course, virtually, but again, that personal feeling is, I feel, really more important to having that wholesome feel in a community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Heather. And we agree 100%. All right, so we wanted to share a couple of the lessons that we learned during the dialogue sessions. And we actually made some adjustments to how we're moving forward based on some of those initial responses. So areas like Yuba and Salinas were ones that we didn't really previously have contacts in. So the outreach and getting folks to attend was a lot more challenging in those areas. So we saw how critical it is to increase. Oh, I just lost my slide. There it is. Okay. We saw how critical it is to increase our time that we're spent doing outreach to areas, especially that we don't know a lot of folks there. And also, as you see in that first bullet, something that we took away and something that we're reinforcing with staff and making sure that we include in the model is how incredibly critical it is to partner with those local groups and try to attend existing events. We know that the local CBOs and the advocates are the experts for the area, and they are going to have that background knowledge that we need. They're going to have the reach that we don't have. So making sure that we make a special effort to partner with folks locally when we're going somewhere, especially somewhere that we don't have partnerships already. We also saw that not everybody knows what CARB is, which is, of course, obvious. Not everyone knows. But we need to be more clear about who CARB is, why we're there, what we do, and just more clear in our communications in general. So, for example, our flyers that we had for the events, we completely revamped those after the first couple meetings, and our outreach emails, we changed the language quite a bit so that we could be more clear about, why should folks care? What is the impact to them? And what are we really trying to get to with the meeting? Because we heard loud and clear that our communication was not clear and it wasn't easy to understand. We also saw that asking for, specific responses to the model or to the presentation is not really helpful. So we switched our conversations to be more broad questions, like how can CARB reach more people in your area? What outreach and engagement works well for you and your community? And also the need to consider local concerns, needs, and events. And we really liked the input to look for local events where folks are already going to be there and trying to set up a booth or trying to set up a table rather than always asking folks to come to us. Next slide. We're on slide 22. So very similar. Oh, sorry, I see your question in the chat, Catalina. So this is a good question. We partnered with a couple folks that we knew and reached out for help from them, but I don't think that we partnered to the degree that we would have liked to. Does anybody else have input on that?
Yeah, sure. I can add a little. I think, yeah, we partnered with a lot of the CBOs that we've worked with at CARB in the past to really help with the outreach in particular and just, making sure we had the right people in the room. But yeah, given the time frame we have, I don't think, it's full co-creation or, working with these groups at their own meetings, like we recommend in the model.
Any other questions on those lessons learned before we move forward onto this slide? All right, great. And yeah, feel free to interrupt me. And if you're having trouble with your raised hand, just unmute. It gives me a chance to breathe. So please don't hold back. Okay, so in this next couple of slides, oh, my slides are freaking out a little bit. Are other folks seeing that, or is it just me?
Yeah, maybe Lisa, could you stop sharing and reshare your slides?
Jonathan, folks might have to shift and click onto the English slides.
Yeah. I have to maybe close my one side presentation real quick and come back.
Okay.
No, that's never happened.
Okay. While we wait for the PowerPoint to get back up, we did have a comment in the chat from Jasmine who said neighborhood watch meetings. And are you all able to hear me okay? I had to switch my headphones. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, let us know, Lisa, if you want someone else to share their screen.
Okay, let me just see what's going on. Oh, man. Okay, I don't know what's happening. Yeah, maybe.
Lisa, I can take over.
Yeah,
Just give
thanks.
me
I
a
don't know
moment.
what's going on. Sure.
Yeah, like give me a moment to rename myself and then open the slides.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Joyce. And then,
Yeah, no worries.
oh yeah, tech, the world of tech, always full of surprises. Just a note, so when Joyce does get those English slides back up, for all the folks that want to look at the slides in English, you'll just have to go to the top of your screen and click View Options, and then you can select the English slides, and that'll be Joyce's screen. And I think she also renamed herself to say English presentation, which is great. Any questions or comments for Amanda while we wait for those slides?
Just
you
a
see the
note from
slides?
Richard, I've been able to switch over to English slides.
Thank
Oh,
you.
great. Thanks, Richard. And I have as well, so I think
Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Amanda,
Thank you,
do see those?
Joyce. Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry about that all. So these next few slides are getting into some of the general themes that we heard at these dialogue sessions. If you want to see more detailed notes, you can go on to our webpage and we can drop the chat or the link into the chat for that. We have all of the notes from each of these meetings uploaded onto our website as well. But these are pulling together some of those high level feedback that we heard a lot, the themes that we heard a lot. So we broke it down into a couple different categories. So really similar to some of the categories that we heard from you all, which is reassuring. Hopefully I'm not being too repetitive, but it is nice to see that there's consistency between the feedback we got from you all and the feedback we got at the dialogue sessions. So that first one is again, partnering with community groups and just how critical it is to take that time and to listen first to understand what folks' needs are, with a focus on what the community's concerns and needs are and not what staff is trying to get out of the meeting. We also heard that no single outreach method is going to reach everybody. So making sure that we diversify our outreach methods as much as possible. And then we also do targeted outreach to folks we know specifically are impacted. We also heard a lot about our communication. Again, these might feel a little bit repetitive of lessons learned, but just want to make sure that we're still elevating them, that it's really important that we share information that's specific, information that's relevant, and that we're transparent, and that we need to make it accessible through plain language and also through efficient translation. Next slide, please. So getting into a couple more themes, engagement and follow through. So we heard that standard practice is not enough. We need to push past what CARB's been doing for years. I think everyone on this call can agree with that. That also includes, as you see on the slide, having all those affected at the table, having a consistent presence in the community. So not just dropping in to ask something and then leaving until we need something again, focusing on having a customer service mindset. We're here to serve the public, and that should be really evident that that's our goal when we're going out and talking to folks. We also heard that equity should be prioritized. So individuals throughout the state are not being impacted equally by air pollution. So our efforts need to focus on those who are most impacted. And that each community we visit, while we've heard similar themes, they have unique needs. So we need to avoid lumping everyone into a box and focus on local needs and concerns, which I think was touched on a little bit earlier by Lachey with those regional biographies, by Anita's comments as well. We had the example of like in rural areas being cognizant of agricultural calendars and how that impacts people's time. So doing that research into the local needs and concerns as well. And then moving into follow through, they emphasize the importance of being thorough, consistent, and continuous in our follow through, that we recognize and follow up with individuals, and that we let folks know what's being done with their feedback, how their participation impacted the work. Any questions so far on some of those things we heard? And also really appreciate, Heather, you sharing your experience. I know there was about 6 of our community experts here that were able to attend a dialogue. So if you have any other points that you'd like to bring up that you heard or any other feedback, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just want to encourage, we'd love to hear from Jasmine, Sierra, Gus, Heather, Lisa, and Richard. We know that you all were able to attend. We'd love to hear your perspective on the themes that Amanda was sharing. If you have anything else that you'd like to add or add some more context to from your experience attending those meetings. We have a comment in the chat from Jasmine that children in school should be involved as well, and a thumbs up for that.
This is Richard. Really nothing to add. I want to say for myself, though, having attended, I believe it was the Riverside meeting that I think it was Riverside that I attended. It was interesting to hear some of the dialogue happening in an area of the state that is not necessarily a place where United Latinos is servicing or offering their resources, but to hear again what are the themes that are being experienced outside of our geographic area from where we are. So that helped a lot for us too.
Nice, really glad you could be there. Thank you. Yeah, Heather?
We went to the same meeting, and it was really nice to see some of our youth there, and get their perspective on how to keep the attention of, or how to grab the attention of the youth, what they're looking for in learning and finding this information. So that was really great to learn. And I think afterwards, some really great conversations happened afterwards, and even meeting with some of the staff in person really helped, at least my intern, really put in perspective of the type of work that we're doing. And he was hired to help build the EV infrastructure within our city. So I think that was really great to have in person.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Heather. Definitely hearing that there's a very different impact when we're in person versus virtual. And that even if the attendance might seem lower, that there's still a lot of value in that. So I really appreciate what you said.
You get a thumbs up to that in the chat from Jasmine. Any other comments from either our community experts who were able to attend? Or I'll just open up the floor to all the community experts. Any comments or thoughts about the feedback from the dialogue sessions? Gustavo.
Yeah. I think like some folks that attended, like from the environmental justice world here in the Southern San Joaquin Valley, were pleasantly surprised of what was put together by this group. Obviously not perfect, but like pretty awesome strides based on, our lived experience with these agencies for the past decade and some folks for decades. And so I think just to say like, kudos to everyone, because like some really critical folks did take a look at it and were pleasantly surprised with this model and how far agencies have gone. And some folks are really excited to see this be implemented in certain agencies across the EPA BDOs. So I think that's just my feedback.
Thank you so much. That's great to hear. Leonora?
Thanks. About the customer service based methods, I think that this has to kind of be considered with the issue of like community input, taking a customer perspective instead of a community perspective, which is like an issue that sometimes comes up in community engagement. For example, if a person is like, I don't like this particular thing, it's not like what I like on my street or something, versus like, is this what my community needs? Is this what's like in the direction of the values of my community? I just think that it's like really important for, the facilitator, in this case, CARB, to just like make it really clear that by participating, people are not taking a customer role, that they're taking like that community perspective.
Mm-hmm. So are you raising like there is a concern if folks get into that mindset for the perspective of being like a customer versus being community, and us like making sure that I'm trying to think of the right words, but that we frame it differently. Do you mind speaking maybe a little bit more to that? I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you said it. I mean, it is an issue. Like, it's an issue that like I've seen, and like I think like people speak about in the field of community engagement. So it's like, you know, like making sure people understand like the purpose and the role of community input in a certain situation. It's not like that, I mean, like in some sense they might be customers, but like it's really like the questions are about the larger community, and and in some cases like the state, and so people need to come with that input, like of course like bring their individual perspectives, but not like, oh, how does this serve me as an individual, but how is it serving my community and my state and like these larger values, like environmental goals, that kind of thing. And so like having that just framed correctly, like having people like maybe even like reminding people or like bringing them back to that, I think is really important, and like helps people kind of understand what the role is that they need to be playing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think kind of giving a little more context to that comment, there is a lot of emphasis on how CARB handles comments and like ease of access to CARB, and especially complaints, that we deal with complaints kind of like how customer service does, that it's easy to reach somebody and easy to get a response. So I think that was maybe more the heart of the comment, but really appreciate what you're saying and the caution that we need to take, because it's easy for these bullet points to get taken out of context. And then I see too Sierra's comments that are really helpful. She said, I think it should be less so customer service and more so public servant, as that addresses CARB staff's positionality by working for a large government entity. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and agreed community service based method versus customer. Meet the community where they're at. And a little bit more from Sierra, sometimes CARB staff aren't always members of our communities and don't serve where they live. Yeah, good point. Anything that you want to add to that, Sierra, or?
Okay, I think if there's no other questions or comments, Sierra said that's all. Awesome, thank you, Sierra. I think we'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda topic. Amanda, are you okay transitioning to our next topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the conversation. Really appreciate it. So there's a couple questions that we'd like to dig a little bit deeper into. And so we're going to transition into our discussion topic at this point. And Julia's going to help us going through instructions on Jamboard. But just to give you a general idea, in our review of the comments so far, both from you all and from the public dialogues and smaller conversations, there's a few areas that we'd really love to hear more from you on and maybe get some additional detail and some additional recommendations. So we have 4 questions prepared, and I'll provide a little bit of context for each of them as we go through it. But for now, I'll pass it to Julia so she can walk through the instructions for Jamboard. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. All right, so I see Jonathan's put the link to the Jamboard in the chat. Hopefully you guys are feeling comfortable with this, with the Jamboard. We used this in our last community meeting together while we were in the breakout rooms, so it'll be the same thing. We have a page for each of the 4 questions that we'd like to discuss with you tonight, and you can toggle between the pages with those arrows at the top of the slides. Next slide, please. And you'll go ahead and add your comments as sticky notes. So you'll see that little notepad icon, and you can click on that and add a sticky note to add a comment. If you aren't able to fit your entire comment into one sticky note, that's totally understandable. And we really want to make sure that we're able to get like the full context of your comment. So feel free to add multiple sticky notes and kind of group them together, or you can say part 1, part 2 on your sticky note. Don't feel limited by one sticky note. Please feel free to use as many as you need to provide us with your full comment and intention. Next slide. Okay, and then when you're done, you're just going to click save. Next slide. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to Amanda. We're going to take each of these questions one by one. Amanda's going to provide a little bit of context for all of the questions as a whole, and then for each individual question as we go through them kind of step by step. So I'll hand it back to you, Amanda.
Thank you. So first of all, just wanted to see, is anyone having trouble with the link that Jonathan put into the chat? I'm seeing about 7, 8. Okay, looks like folks are clicking on it. It looks like there's about 15 people in the Jamboard. Okay, I got a looks good from Gustavo. If for whatever reason you're having trouble accessing it or posting on it, feel free to put your comments instead in the chat, or of course say them verbally. And we'll make sure that we're recording all of those responses and incorporating it into the Jamboard after the meeting. And also, if there's something you think of afterwards, we'll leave this Jamboard open. Feel free to add after the meeting as well. Oh, awesome. I'm seeing it now. Thanks, Julia. So for this first question, kind of goes back to what Heather had mentioned about Riverside, that we heard a lot about youth outreach. And then we also had a comment about reaching out to folks in K through 12. So we wanted to get a little bit more context on that. We know we need to put more information into the model about youth outreach, but we do also want to consider that there's some complications when we're interacting with minors, like especially a K through 12 situation that we need to keep in mind. So a couple of questions for you all is, how would you define youth? And then if you have recommendations for reaching folks in K through 12, things we should keep in mind. And then, of course, if you have recommendations for folks over 18 or for college students, that would also be really helpful. Anita, it's asking for a password. That's weird.
Yeah, Anita, are you seeing, are you able to click the link that Jonathan provided, and is it taking you to a password page?
Yes, it's asking me for a password. There's one was sent at 6:40 and one sent a link at 6:42, right? I'm not sure which of those I'm supposed to use, but I tried both and they both asked me for an email to log on and the password. And you're saying it shouldn't, right?
Correct. Yeah, let me put the link directly from my address there and try that, see if that works. Okay, so I do see some comments.
I'm in now. Yeah,
You're in now? Okay, wonderful.
the other ones didn't work for me.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, no problem. So I do see some sticky notes coming in here. Thank you guys for starting to put your comments in here. Wanted to ask for a little bit of clarification on this LA comment. Is that like LA like the city, or is this just a spelling error or a test sticky? Does anybody have any verbal comments or questions for Amanda and the CARB folks on this question of
Hi, yeah, this is Lisa with the dilated eyes. Yeah, like I consider kids up to like about senior in high school. I consider youth from like from about 15 to about 19, maybe 20. And I consider adult everything after 20. That's all.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Any other verbal comments or questions? Kind of two-part question here. How do you define youth? And then what are your recommendations for reaching a K through 12 community member? Okay, thanks, Lillian. I see your comment. Okay, but this one's a test sticky. Thank you. All right, any other verbal comments or questions? If you're having any trouble with the stickies, feel free to go off mute. We've got some variation here in terms of the definition of youth. But generally, you guys are all on the same page here. High school students aged 18 to 35, which goes with this comment as well. Anyone who self-IDs as a youth plus 30 and under is usually young. And then we've got some good suggestions starting here on recommendations for reaching K through 12, hosting school field trips and tours. Lillian, I see your comment there in the chat, hands-on experience. Do you mind providing a little bit more context there? I'd love to hear further what you're suggesting with hands-on experience. Lillian, are you able to unmute? Okay. Well, it looks like you guys really have the sticky notes down. And lots of good comments there. I'm just moving these around as they come in to have them reflect those two questions. And Amanda, I'll also ask you, is there any other like context or any items that you want our community experts to keep in mind while they answer these questions?
I think I'm also wondering about, because there's a tendency to assume post high school we're looking at college students, but that's not a fair representation, right? So for folks that maybe are not college students but are still within that youth age, any recommendations for them? Because I think there's a lot that has to do with like reaching out to the schools, but folks who maybe are not currently in school.
Yeah, good point. Do you guys are community experts? Do you have any recommendations for reaching those youth age ranges that you identified that might be outside of a K through 12 school or may not be connected to a university or an educational organization? How can we reach those folks?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. Sierra, so the question was acknowledging that it seems like a lot of community experts have identified an age range up to 30 is certainly to 25 years old. And those might be folks who aren't in a K through 12 school or connected to a university. So how would you recommend reaching those folks who are youth but may not be connected to a university? Because some of the suggestions that we have for reaching K through 12 are things like hosting school field trips and tours and participating in school events. So how else could we reach those folks if not through a university or an educational institution? Heather, I see your hand up.
I'm thinking, well, wherever the youth are at that are not in school, most likely if they're not at school, they're probably working, or hopefully at community events. So definitely through those community events. But that is a really good question. I think possibly through career fairs or career education type things, because everybody needs air. Like air is very important, and this is a government agency, so we need. That's what I'm thinking, just off the top of my head, though. But someone can think of something better.
Great, thanks for that suggestion. So maybe through like job fairs. Espe, I see your hand up.
So then in terms of the outreach to the youth that aren't in school so the young adults through workforce development programs, where they're going and getting the training for their jobs that they might be a part of. And then, the job fairs is another location. And also like the employers that have, a lot of entry-level positions, unfortunately, like the Amazons and then those kind of locations, Starbucks, different places where there might be youth that are out of high school, but then they're transitioning to the workforce component. So those are some of the places that we've outreached to them before.
Great, thanks, Espe. Alec, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I really like the idea of going to job fairs, as far as reaching out to young adults. But I know that when trying to like reach that specific demographic, it's, you should try to think about doing outreach that might be unorthodox, like maybe like going out to where there's a lot of eateries or shopping centers or even places like the mall. I know malls aren't as packed as they used to be, but places where people are spending money, spending time in the community, meeting with friends, farmers markets. Yes, yeah, that's a great one as well. Even places where there's a lot of nightlife, it might help setting up a booth and just trying to go out and talk to people, whoever's willing to give their input. I mean, that always helps.
Yeah, great. Thanks for identifying not only kind of where we could go to engage with those folks, but also how. by going there in person and chatting with folks. Any other comments on that particular element? I see a lot of suggestions on where we could connect with those folks, but do you have any specific comments or suggestions for how? So, particular modes of communication tools that might be.
I'll just chime in. This is Richard. I kind of
Mhm.
put it in the chat earlier. Arts. Use your artists, find out where your young artists are in there and engage with them to help you to reach other artists. Arts has always been very successful in any social movement.
Great, thanks, Richard. And I see a thumbs up to that too from Alec and Heather.
Yeah, that's a really good one because NCARB in the Riverside area has some really great art already there. So that's a great jumping off point.
I'm not able to get the hand up again. I don't know why it disappears, but this is Anitha. And I know from interacting with my nieces, and sending them emails is not a happening thing. They are on, they do text if you're lucky, and the rest is social media. If, most of us I've talked to a lot of people, they even want to find out what their kids are doing who are not living at home, who are young adults. And they go on to social media just to see what their own children are doing. So, and I sense, but maybe Carb can give us some feedback on that. There's a little bit of is there a reluctance or some kind of governmental liability or difficulty in government agencies using social media or not?
Anita, this is a great question, because it's something that we've been really trying to push, is to use our social media more and to have it be more engaging. There's some challenges moving forward with social media, just in that there's a lot of review that needs to happen. And typically you want it to go out quickly. But when you have like all these levels of review, it can get bogged down. And we do have some limitations on, what we're allowed to say and like legal concerns, but it's definitely something we're pushing on to be more in the direction that you're talking about. I don't know, Heather, who's on this call, Arius, if you want to chime in, if there's any like specific restrictions that we have. But the social medias exist. We just don't feel at this point that they're being used to their potential.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Heather Arias here, the division chief that's helping to support the work that the team's doing, and of course, very thankful for all of your time and efforts that you've put in. As Amanda mentioned, we are pushing pretty hard, this group, against changing the normal use of our social media. I do know that they try and keep it, very high level for the chair, and they're using it more as like a media outreach than they are for communities. So we're trying to push on this to see if we can have either separate accounts set up that we can use to engage specifically the youth, because we have heard this comment a few times now. So appreciate that, appreciate your suggestion. I also think that it would be helpful for us if you could, if you have time or thoughts on digging into this. This is the thing that I've been pushing, that our website is not really conducive for a lot of community members. It's super hard to navigate. The level of language used on our website is not very friendly for community members. So really trying to push a lot of that through social media. So we'll keep pushing on it. And your comments here is very helpful for us to point to as we do that.
Hi, this is Lisa Flores. I think the previous speaker was hit it dead on. I personally think guys need to come up with a persona. I came up with the name just now, Allegra Alvarez. She is the media darling of CARB, and she's here to explain air quality to you. And you guys should have like a younger team and just explain the basics and start with that and start cultivating your following on Insta. And recently I've seen on TikTok, they have said someone's doing like, you're Mexican if, like on Saturday mornings, you wake up and you smell pine sol, that's, just very, you're having a bad air quality day when you need your inhaler, something along that line as a good kickoff. And I think you could probably get it through your stream of gatekeepers faster, because you could actually do a bunch of little vignettes and get them through all at once. And then as things come up, it looks like you guys are more responsive faster.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lisa. I see Gustavo's had his hand up for a few seconds, so I want to get to Gustavo, and then I think we'll move on to the next question. We do have a few more questions for you guys to consider. Go ahead, Gustavo.
Yeah, how's it going? I'll try to keep it short, but like I know we talked a lot about like where like the spaces to reach, but on some experience in working with youth and community organizing, I think in the past something that was very successful was like not only knowing where to reach to the youth, but then like what to do with the youth. And so like one is like creating a space, whether it's in like we previously would do like a youth science cohort at the public library in downtown Bakersfield, and like youth would come from like high school, mostly college age students, to like learn like it's kind of boring, but like in inspector level citizen science, like data gathering, like shortcuts and like how to ground truth and how to balloon map and stuff like that. And so we would create spaces and cohorts. Another thing that really helped and kind of opened our eyes on like better youth engagement was like during the census. We would do like, and obviously this is something that we didn't make up, something that the folks before us came up with in the farm worker labor movement, but it was around teatros campesinos, so like community theaters. And very specifically, like we would use a jazz cafe spot here in downtown Bakersfield, where we do like open theater, like skits on census, air quality, how to report environmental stuff. And again, it was youth oriented. So I guess those are some things that you can do with like the what do we do with youth, aside from everything else. But those are just some issues, some things that helped us in the past.
Great. Thanks, Gustavo, for sharing those kind of like success avenues that you've had before. All right, so we're going to move on to the next question, and I'll hand it over to Amanda to provide a little context on this question.
Yeah, thank you so much. That conversation was awesome. I think we're going to need to add a full section on youth, and we have the content just from that Jamboard. So thank you so much. So this next question is getting into finding and collecting qualitative data. So part of the question is what avenues already exist to collect that data, and then what new opportunities or methods would you recommend to gain more? And we do want to have this concern in mind and be considerate around being extractive and being insensitive to people's life experiences, because we know we're asking for people's stories, and a lot of times those are really traumatic, and so we want to make sure that we're approaching that in a respectful and considerate way. So recommendations that you have for how we can show due respect and consideration when folks are sharing their personal experiences and stories would also be really helpful here.
I have something that might be too long for a sticky note. So you had mentioned earlier tabling at events and kind of meeting the community where they are, events that you're not necessarily putting on yourself. Just having a table and families being able to come up to you and talk kind of opens that door to hear people's stories without it being, you know, a super formal environment.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I almost feel like that's the reaction to seeing the table is like, hey, let me go tell them my experience with air pollution. So appreciate that. And then I'm also seeing a lot of collaborate with trusted community organizations. Yeah, because folks don't necessarily know who we are. So just jumping in and asking for them to tell their stories is probably not ideal.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of comments here also on research, like no research for the sake of research, research for action. Ask permission in language where they know what research is being done. So invite any further comments, kind of clarifying that research component.
Anita?
Yeah, sorry, just a clarifying question. I'm not sure I really understand the basis of this question. Like, could you give a scenario as to maybe I'm missing it? Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. So the qualitative data in general or the concern about being extracted?
Well, qualitative data, it's sort of very broad. And I guess extractive is, you mean intrusive, is what you're trying to say. I gather that part of it, but I'm sort of lacking context a little bit in knowing how to respond to that. So, like, what kind of qualitative data would you be collecting? I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So within the model, there's questions about like what's the data around the work that you're doing. And I think CARB staff typically will want to look at, you know, what's the scientific data, but we want folks to also consider the qualitative data too, like what are people's experiences? What are they living through? What are they personal, like how are they personally being affected, you know, by this rule, by the pollution in their area where they grew up. So I think we're looking for, we want staff to not just look at the numbers, but we want them to consider the people. And how do we collect that data while still, like you said, being respectful and not being intrusive? Trying to encourage folks to have empathy ultimately at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of a few thumbs up and a +1 to the community-led research comments. So thank you guys for also responding to each other's. All right, any other folks who would like to share verbally? Any suggestions that you have for how to help CARB staff really understand people's stories without being extractive or not trauma informed or respectful in the requesting of that information of folks' stories and experience. We have a comment from Sierra in the chat that CARB should contract a documentarian. That would be so fire. Sierra, any additional comments on like what stories or where you would want to see that focus? Okay, a lot of comments here also leaning into the idea of developing good partnerships with existing community organizations, organizations that have existing relationships, such as universities, community-led research organizations, community orgs. And I see another sticky note here again, leaning into that kind of overall theme that we heard and feedback from you as community experts and community members at the dialogues of follow-up, how important follow-up is, and that follow-up can apply here as well with folks' stories, following up with how their story contributed to a particular action. Sierra, I see a comment from you, a regional focus. Any other folks who would like to share verbally? Okay. So again, you guys can continue to add sticky notes here. Feel free to go back. This page will remain open for you. I think if there's no other verbal comments, we'll go ahead and move to our third question. And I'll hand it back to Amanda to, again, provide some context here.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So we started talking about this a bit with Lachey's presentation, but I think we would like to hear a little bit more on your recommendations for how we address abuse and harassment in engagement. We know that when we're asking folks to meet with government entities that have caused harm, that there's a lot of distrust, that this is really a concern. And also when we're trying to gather everyone into the same room, we're going to have folks with different opinions and different viewpoints. So curious what you have found effective to address this concern and what have been like appropriate responses that you've seen or responses you would encourage when we do see abuse or harassment start to take place? Yeah, trained moderators.
This is abuse and harassment where? I'm sorry, I couldn't find my hand.
Oh, no worries. Abuse and harassment, like when we're hosting a public meeting. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
I think that's primarily where we're thinking of, and especially putting like community members in or inviting community members to a meeting and then something happening. We really don't want to put folks in that situation or create a hostile environment in our public meetings. So just curious what guiding principles or resources we should be looking at.
Amanda, I have a clarifying question for you too, kind of in line with that. So are you referring to here abuse and harassment that can take place between community members at a meeting or also between CARB staff and community members? Or is that kind of encompassing all of those potential
I think it can
sources?
encompass all of it. Yeah. I see the comment on citizens' assemblies as a model. I don't know a lot about that. Do you mind expanding on it a little bit for us?
Yeah, I put some examples of this in the comments that I submitted, like the written comments. So I can put I can put some in the chat now. But like they're they're like smaller groups, and they're representative samples of communities, and then they go through like longer periods of discussion and presentations together so that they uh are able to like do a lot of the things you talked about, like set ground rules together, discuss values together, and then and deliberate together. So I can put some examples in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
All right, I see some good comments coming in here on the Jamboard, kind of related to location, how location might help prevent or provide a safe place. Also kind of preparatory work that CARB can engage in to prepare staff, prepare community members, core values. Does anybody have any, in your experience, have you come across any trainings or resources, specific resources providing guidelines on how to address abuse and harassment that you'd like to pass along to CARB? And we've got a sticky note here. As I said before, safety. Invite that commenter to provide a little bit more context there. Are we referring to the past conversation that we had earlier in the meeting regarding law enforcement and police presence? Or invite you to provide a little bit more context to what you mean here in terms of safety. Gustavo, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I could give an example. So recently, EPA, federal EPA Region 9 came to Buttonwillow, here, community in Kern County, to talk about like its first of a kind carbon capture underground injection well, right? And so it was a big public meeting, tons of industry, tons of, executives and lobbyists and whatnot. And Buttonwillow, for those that don't know, it's a hyper like rural, unincorporated community right off the five, in between Bakersfield and Taft, and mostly agricultural farm workers, a ton of undocumented folks. And in this project specifically, the community was against this project, and so they organized, did a little march, walked to the little community center in Buttonwillow, were met with, mostly an auditorium full of industry backed, folks that wanted to move forward with this project. And as the residents were coming in, the sheriff was called, for like, some said for quality control, some said for crowd control, but most of the residents there felt it was to intimidate folks that were undocumented to actually speak out against this project. And so as the authorities came in, some of the residents we're like, yeah, we're out. This is going to be a public space, and we thought things were going to be different, but obviously, like, and Kern County sheriffs, by God, like their history is horrendous. And so I think when BDOs within these organizations, agencies, do kind of medium to larger events, I think they should really consider either like private security or something else that doesn't flag the potential engagement and participation and isolation of an entire community. And so I give that as an example of what not to do, I guess.
Great. Thank you, Gustavo, for sharing that experience and providing a little bit of context there on how the impact of law enforcement involvement.
Yeah, I think it gets at some of these other comments too about partnering with a CBO that's trusted, because they'll have that context that we don't necessarily have.
Great. Catalina, I see your hand up. I think we'll take Catalina's comment, and then we'll go to the last question, just provide a little bit of context there, and then we'll go to break, and then pick up with the rest of our agenda. So go ahead, Catalina. Catalina, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now.
There you are.
Yeah,
Yep,
I just
we
wanted
can
to
hear you.
second Gustavo's point about preventing intimidation, especially at like larger and like more controversial meetings. I've definitely seen many examples of that. Yeah, and I just want to share another example of like I think staff who are like facilitating meetings should also be prepared to have some kind of intervention when there's like direct intimidation from an individual. Like I've seen, like for example, like at a public meeting, like a line of people commenting and just sort of people sitting like adjacent to that line, kind of giving people comments and just like, like hateful rhetoric as people are waiting to make their comment. And I've seen staff like this is not specific to CARB staff, but it's kind of disheartening for staff to not have any response to that or not have any way of like addressing situations like that. And I've seen it just kind of like go by the wayside. So I think, yeah, I think thinking on that.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Catalina. All right, so I'm going to take us to the last question and just have Amanda provide a little bit of context here, and then we'll go to break. You guys can put your sticky notes on there while we're at break if you feel like it, or after the meeting while this slide stays open. So I'll hand it over to you, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate that we're being cognizant of time here. So for this last question, we had a lot of comments on ensuring that there's transportation options and also letting us know that public transit is not always reliable or functional, especially post-COVID and especially in the evenings. Right now, we're not aware of a way for us to pay for public transportation, but we are wondering what kind of transportation options people are using in your community, and if there are other options for transportation, like we've seen potentially ride shares with electric vehicles, and some others that pop up locally. So just curious, what are people currently using in your area for transportation? What works well for them? And what kind of resources would you recommend? So I know we want to go to break, so please feel free to add your Post-its here either on break or when we have time at the end, we can come back to this question as well. Just don't want to cut into your break either. But yeah, I think we can go ahead and break now, Julie, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, guys, so we're going to take a break and we'll come back at 7:30, and then we'll pick up with contract updates. So take a few minutes, stretch your legs. We're in the home stretch. We'll come back and do some contract updates and then closing closing remarks, and feel free to put your comments in there. In the Jamboard, and I'll put in the chat when we're going to be coming back.
$7:35.
We can do, yeah, if we want to take full 10 minutes, we can do 7:35. That should be fine. Okay. All right, we'll do 7:35. All right, welcome back, guys. Hope everybody got to stretch their legs. Thank you, Carb staff, for getting that PowerPoint back up. Let me just check in and see where we are on the agenda. All right. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Jonathan and Heather. They are going to be going over some contract updates, administrative updates. So I will hand it over to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Julia, and thank you everyone for such an awesome, robust discussion so far. I think we probably added over 100 new comments to think about for the model. This has been a really helpful discussion for us so far as we work with you to improve what we're doing with community engagement. But we did want to take some time to talk about your contracts. I know there were some recent changes that your contract managers have discussed with you about a no-cost extension. So we just wanted to orient everyone back toward what's been done so far. And so with that, we've had the first few tasks have already been completed. And so task one was the first virtual meeting, just going over the contracts and overview of the model. And then, task two was a big one. That was, going through the model in detail and getting a lot of those line by line responses that we got from you all, which we're still working through now, as well as attending the second community expert meeting where we heard from you after you review the model. So today you will be completing task 4, and so you can be submitting invoices for that after this meeting. Again, we've had a lot of great discussion about where we are so far in reviewing all of your comments and the comments in the community dialogues as well. So next slide. So as your contract managers have already discussed with you, we will need to be extending your contract deadlines through the end of this year to really, take the time and do our due diligence in going through each and every comment that we receive from you all, that we receive from the public, and really just make sure that, we really are being meaningful in everything that we're doing, so that goes toward the spreadsheet and making sure that we are addressing every comment, and then also going through categorizing, telling that sort of story for everyone to see as well. We have heard some comments from community expert as well, having some concerns about the budget deficit in the state and, if that might have some impacts on your contracts. So, we did want to leave the space here today to discuss that. And so I'm going to pass it to Heather Arias, and she'll give a little more context in regards to that.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So just as a quick update for you all, we have not received any additional direction as it relates to the budget beyond the memo staff previously talked with you all about for travel. However, that being said, I do want to make sure that we have a chance to at least give you some information about what we have seen happen in the past. So in the past, when we've had major budget issues like we have now, there have been times in which the administration has ordered us to stop work on contracts and essentially terminate the contracts. So we have not received that yet, but I also want to make sure that everybody's aware that, that is something that could happen. So what I would recommend is that if in fact we receive that direction, we will be reaching out to you. We will provide you written notice just as required in the contract. We will of course pay you for any work that's been completed as of that point. But we might not have the opportunity to finish out the project if we are asked to do this. So just wanted to be transparent and open with you all as to what has happened in the past and see if you have questions for us. I will say that if we do get the direction, of course, we will make sure that we not only communicate with you in writing, but the team will call and email and do whatever it takes to make sure we get a hold of you and ensure that we are paying you for the work that you've completed as of that point. And I see
Heather, I see a hand up. Yeah. Gustavo, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a like theoretical question. Say that does happen. Like, what is the probability that CARB would then just leave this at the table, like with all the work that has been done? Like, is it just contract work with like us or with the experts, or like internally does this then get shelved and put away, and then, or does
that's a
does
good
CARB
question.
still move forward with that?
Yes, we will move forward. Absolutely. It just won't be as much interaction with you all at this time as we would like. And yeah, absolutely. Got to move forward, got to give the staff something. And as the staff have reiterated a few times, this is going to be a living document. So if by chance we got in a situation where we had to end the contract, we will certainly be, continuing to work with all of you and whatever opportunity we have moving forward to adjust. But yeah, we'll keep it going and finish it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Yeah, I mean, this work really is a priority for all of us here and, for a lot of folks at the agency. And so, the only thing that maybe wouldn't happen depending on when the contracts would end, which again, that's just based on, a chance of that happening, is that maybe we wouldn't get a revised model to you all and wouldn't be able to work with you at this fourth community expert meeting. But we'll still be revising this initial draft with all the comments we've received so far, and really, try to produce the best model that we can for our staff.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Richard.
Quick question, and not to make it problematic, but even with the work, even with the completion, is there a guarantee of adoption?
So the board is not adopting it. However, which is probably a good thing because it's less work for us to get this infused into the whole agency. I can tell you that I, along with the team, have been updating the whole top administration of the agency as we've been moving along in this process. Everybody is very excited about this work. Everybody is very interested in getting this information. I do think it will be used, but to make the truly meaningful change that you all have helped us to articulate, it's going to take time. So I do think it's going to be used. It's going to be slow in infusion, if that makes sense, throughout the agency. But yes, all of my colleagues, the 12 other division chiefs, all of the deputies, the whole executive office, they're all very excited about this product and want to be able to share it with all the staff. Lisa.
Okay, we got a few more hands up. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, this is a question I had when I first saw the contract extended, having worked with the state before in a state agency and understanding the budget. And I think everybody needs to understand the signs will be there if they're going to cancel our contracts, if they start to talk about what happens to the state employees if they do a reduction in force or if they do, what is it, PLP time?
Mm-hmm, like the furloughs.
Yeah, like the furloughs. So, those are the true signs, because I've been through this before where the budget is so bad, they go through every single agency, and unless it's essential, dealing with safety, they cut like almost every single contract, including something as simple as paper. So I understand where you guys are at. I'll be looking for the signs. It's just unfortunate that we have to extend it out till December, but it is what it is. But I think that one of the things in the process going on with this extension is communication. And I can see this going through. I think that your project may be delayed some due to budgetary constraints and time constraints, and possibly staffing constraints. It really all depends upon the budget. That's all. Thank you.
All good points. Thanks, Lisa. So I see in the chats, if the model's not approved by CARB board, does that mean it will be optional for CARB staff to implement? No. With the executive office, they can direct that this be used, and then individual divisions can also direct. My division, I will be directing them to use it, so it won't be optional across the board, especially if the executive office directs it. So we don't need the board to adopt it. They will be updated though, as we talk about all of our various work. And then there was a question about doing the work without a contract. Sure, but that also, we also want to be respectful of your time in the agreement that we made with you to make sure that we reimburse you for your time. So we just wanted to make sure we were transparent with you this evening so you were aware of a possibility. And that way, as you're going along, you're making sure that, we will definitely, like I said, we'll go above and beyond to reach out to you if this happens, so that you're not in jeopardy of not getting paid. But we absolutely will pay you for any work up to the point of issuing a letter. And then after that, of course, we will always look to you all for any guidance and efforts you're willing. And I know many of you over the years have donated a lot of your time and effort to us, which we greatly appreciate. But we also understand that we need to also be paying you. So.
Great, thanks, Heather. Just want to be mindful of time. We've got about 13 minutes left, and I know you guys have a timeline that you'd like to present, and then also the next steps as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that really quickly. We're definitely here for next to 20-30 minutes after the meeting. So even if we have to cut questions short on this item, we can definitely come back to it at 8 o'clock.
Yep. I see Deidre's got her hand.
Lily, I just wanted to say, yeah, Lillian had a comment.
Go ahead, Lillian.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just have a quick comment. Is it possible to let CARB, the executive office, know, like, I'm willing to join the meetings if there's no money, or that, if the budget doesn't go through, if that could be an option for some of us, because I know there's a lot of us that are here that are community advocates, and we've done a lot of work already for free. So I really don't mind finishing this project. I usually, when I start something, I like to finish it. So is that something that you guys can relay to the executive office and let them know if that could be, just an option for all of us?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, if we got to that point, we will take any help that you are willing to give us. Absolutely. Don't even need to ask the executive office. I already know what they would say. Absolutely, we would love to have your help in any way, shape, or form if you're able and willing to donate your time. Okay, but hopefully we don't get to that.
Yeah. Just in case,
Yeah, I appreciate that. We really appreciate all the time of you guys, and agreed. I know many of you have given a lot of your time and expertise over the years to us, and we greatly appreciate all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say it's amazing to see so many of you in the chat, volunteering your time if it does come to that. You all have really been so helpful so far. So, hopefully it doesn't come to that, but we appreciate, everything we've gotten so far.
Yes, absolutely.
Got some other comments in the chat here as well. A lot of folks reiterating that sentiment of Lillian, that they're willing to continue working with CARB. And then also a comment from Maria, this project is a baseline that many other agencies should adopt after receiving all the feedback we have. It should definitely be a priority in the budget, in my opinion, regardless of our willingness to volunteer for this, for the sake of its meaningfulness to our communities. And a comment from Richard, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
I'm a Star Trek fan. Sorry, I'm a Star Trek fan.
I knew it sounded familiar.
Yes, thank you all. We greatly appreciate it and agree. A little bit back to Maria's comment of there are a few other agencies that are kind of watching this and are interested in what we have, and I'm sure that they will be asking for it. So we definitely will share and make sure that the state's resources are shared amongst any of the agencies that are interested, not just, of course, ours. So thank you for that. Richard, you got Lashay going, man. You just don't even know her in the sci-fi.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions or comments on this piece, I think we can move on to the timeline, which I think is the next slide.
Yeah, and thank you all. You all are so amazing. We'll just get through these last slides, and then Julie will help wrap up the meeting. So just to orient us toward, the next steps, this is assuming the contracts continue as scheduled. So we have our third virtual meeting right now, which is task 4. And then as Lashay mentioned earlier, we have a lot of comments to continue to go through, including the ones from tonight, as well as everything we've heard so far. And, really working through all of those and hopefully getting a revised model to you late summer, early fall timeframe to review. And then about a month after that, we'll have our 4th and final virtual meeting, likely this fall. Next slide. All right, so just next steps. Again, I'll go through it pretty quickly. I touched on a lot of this already. We're going to review the remainder of the comments. So as Lashay laid out, we have about 50 to 60% of comments left, plus the ones from tonight. We really want to think about how we're going to convey all of this material to all of you and everyone else, since we're posting this publicly on our website as well. So we'll have the spreadsheet detailing all the comments received, what we did with those comments, which were elevated to upper management, etc. And then also thinking about the storytelling and how we're going to provide summaries of these comments and outcomes. And then work with all of you to really, flesh out these final details, improve the revised model until we have this quote unquote final version that is still going to be a living document that our staff will use once it's released later this year. So at that point, I'll pass it off to Julia to wrap up.
All right, we can go ahead and head to the next slide. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for an incredibly productive meeting, for all of your comments and suggestions. If you have time to do the meeting evaluation form, that would be wonderful to help us improve our time together the next time at our final community expert meeting. Just want to be mindful of folks' time. We have a few extra minutes here, but if you need to leave at the end of the meeting, please go ahead. But if you also want to stick around and continue to have a discussion about any of the items that we discussed today, we will stay on the line here for another 20, 30 minutes, I think. or was it 15-20? Sorry, my brain's having a moment here.
20 to 30 is good, however long people need.
Yeah, however long you guys need, we'll stay here and continue to discuss those items. Yeah, so I think the link for the meeting evaluation is in the chat. If you have to head off early, thank you so much. It was wonderful to see all of you again and hear your comments. And we'll keep the meeting open for now and just take any additional questions and comments you have. Jose, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just want to share a quick announcement. Just for processing invoice and all that, just be on the lookout. Check your email sometime this week. You should be getting from us a template invoice just to make sure that you confirm everything there, so we can process your payment for this task, which is this task 4, this meeting that we're having tonight. So just check your email. You should be receiving something from your contract manager, so we can process that as soon as possible.
Thank you for that information. So I guess this ends the meeting.
Well, we got a few more minutes.
Okay.
So if you have any additional questions or comments, feel free to offer those. I know that we left some of our questions less discussed than others. For example, that 4th question on transportation. So if you'd like, I can go back there. Richard, see your hand up?
Yeah, 2 quick things. One, and I had mentioned it to Jose in a previous email, in between all of these things, United Latinos has continued to do and work on its efforts to learn more about preferred methodologies for engagement, especially amongst intergenerational Latino families, Spanish speakers, and mixed language speakers as well. And I was sharing with Jose, it was a very, these last few focus groups were very interesting in that without prompts, it seemed the majority of them who had differences of opinion as far as how to engage them, everybody had their own suggestions as to what would work and what would not work. Without prompts, what started coming out over and over again was the use of the regular US mail. Because they all made comment of the fact that, well, I use Facebook and I use WhatsApp and I use this and I use that. And they all had their differences and even in the discussions, but they all agreed that, but we open our mail. So I thought I'd share that with you all. And then the second thing, just to bring forward, for those of you with CARB, recently there was an event at that United Latinos hosted at La Familia Counseling Center related to the small off-road engine transition, especially for the electrification of small landscapers. We ran into a huge language access barrier there at that meeting that I will be talking to the Air Resources Board about in a meeting tomorrow. But if anyone from CARB, I'm not sure if anyone from CARB is invited to that follow-up meeting tomorrow, but if any of you would like any direct input on that and the experiences of the monolithic speakers who were at that meeting, I would be happy to share that with you at a different time. But thank you so much for the information.
Great, thank you, Richard. And you have a vote of confidence there from SFA, who said that your postcards work, especially in rural areas. Yeah, and thanks. Amanda would also love to hear more about the language barrier issue as well. Any other additional comments or questions from our community experts? Definitely want to make this space for you. Anything else that you'd like to share? Oh, Catalina, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks everyone for organizing and hosting the meeting. I was just thinking about the timeline, so just wanted to ask a clarifying question about, like, it seems kind of like I kind of see the race of the clock of like for like the new budget to be finalized, and then like for the revised model to come out. Just wondering if like there's like a deadline or like yeah, just wondering if not like a deadline, but just if there's like a day certain by when kind of CARB knows like the budget for this project is like going to continue, and then like if we expect to see the revised plan like after that or like before that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, we don't have a date certain. I can tell you that the next wave, if you will, of what I would expect will be when the governor releases his May revise. Then after that, there'll be a whole lot of discussions over the month and a half after that for the budget. So sometimes we see around the May revise, and then we tend to see possibly some more direction about the time the budget's passed. And then last, we might see some more when the end of the ledge session, because there's what's called trailer bills to make modifications to the budget. So there's a bunch of different touch points
Yeah.
over the next few months. So that's the unfortunate. I wish we had a drop dead answer for you. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. Yeah, just because I saw that the revised model is like scheduled to be out like in like it looks like late summer or fall.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it seems like it would be well after like the budget is finalized.
Right.
Okay.
It could be. And that's definitely one of the things we wanted to make sure y'all were aware of. But on the flip side, we wanted to make sure we provided you with a good product too, that was responsive to all of the wonderful advice and direction that you guys have given us.
Cool. Yeah, appreciate it. Like I understand you're working within like those bounds.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add to that, regardless of what happens with these contracts, internally in this group, we still plan to push forward and, get this revised model posted on our website, with the spreadsheet and the storytelling, and still have that, with the schedule you saw on that slide.
Yeah, and I think earlier there was a request to keep communicating. So if we do find out anything, we'll definitely err on the side of more communication over less. And we definitely want to look for ways, if somehow we're aware in advance, we want to look for ways to still finish these contracts out too.
Great. Good night, Richard. Thank you. Oh, we got a request from Espe. Maybe we can get an update to the group on the language barrier at our next community meeting. Any other questions, comments from our community experts? Thank you. Thanks, Catalina. Thanks, Caro. Good night.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for all your comments and suggestions.
Thank you, everyone.